What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 35th episode of the PlayStation Drive. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined, as always, by the man himself, Matt Szymanski. Matt, how are you doing on this lovely, lovely Thursday, good sir?
I'm doing well, my friend. I'm just, dancing away, having a good time. Totally not upset about all this stupid snow that we have. But yeah, otherwise, I'm doing well, my friend. How you doing? How's Vacation Ryan going?
Vacation Ryan is just hit peak Vacation Ryan mode. I'm watching lots of anime. I'm building commander decks for Magic the Gathering cards. Yes! I'm playing some PlayStation 1 games. So it's just, I'm having a ball, man. I'm having a ball. But
So what I'm hearing is I have to dig out my old Magic cards and we have to do a one-off the Magic Drive episode where we just play Magic against each other.
We should.
Right?
We should. I
right?
mean, we can do, to be fair, webcam Magic is pretty much all I play now anyways, as far as Magic anyways. I don't play it in person anymore. So it works out fine. But anyways, this is the PlayStation Drive where we talk about PlayStation and not Magic the Gathering. So we're going to clean the garage a little bit. So folks at home, if you'd like to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that. Number one, you can support us by subscribing to us on your podcast feed of choice, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. We're on all the places you find podcasts. So check us out there. Also, leave us a little rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts because that's a thing now. So definitely you leave us a star rating on there. Maybe even leave a little review on Apple Podcasts. That all help the show grow as well. Also, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/YubiCapri. You can see our beautiful faces every single week because we put a video version of the show every single Friday morning. So you can check us out there. Of course, like the video, comment, all that awesome stuff. And then last but not least, if you want to support the show in more ways other than what I just mentioned, of course, patreon.com/YumiCapri is how you do that. Throw a little tip in the old tip jar and out comes content, including early access to this show, plus some other goodies as well, including the console war room, which is actually having a new episode today with Mr. Babbitt and Sean Capri talking about the Activision Xbox situation that happened. So if you want to hear kind of like an even more extended episode of what we're going to talk about this week on the show, you can go listen to that on Patreon. That's on the exclusive tier. So $3 or more on Patreon. All right, let's grab our 8 tracks, pop them in because we got to get the show going. It's time for the playlist. So Matt, hit me up with the games you played this week, my friend.
Yeah, I've continued my journey with God of War PC. And again, as anybody's aware, that game continues to remain stellar. It runs really well on PC. I struggled a bit when I was trying to stream, record, and play the game at the same time, which is admittedly my own fault. But outside of when I'm not doing all those things at the same time, it runs really well. The game, I'm having a blast with it. Again, I've been going through this coming back to a bunch of these games that I have played and then I've forgotten about and just remembering about how good they are. And it's really, really fantastic. The PC port is fantastic. I also love how people have already modded Carl Johnson. They modded Carl into the game already in the space of Kratos. And there's already a bunch of ridiculous mods going on, which is just a good time. And I also very quickly want to mention Eastward because I know it's not PlayStation related, but the game is just fantastic. If you're looking for something that's like a weird fusion of like Undertale, but also The Last of Us, but also it's beautiful. It's incredibly designed. The story so far has completely kept me on my toes. It's so good, Ryan. I don't know if you had an opportunity to check it out, but I highly encourage that you do. I'm not usually one for music and video games, but I have my Switch blasting every time that I'm playing this game because it's so good. I'm having so much fun with it. But what about yourself, Ryan? What have you been up to? Nice.
As for me, I continue to play old games, as I talked about on last week's show. So I'm continuing to plug away at Valkyrie Profile 2, Silmeria. I'm having a lot of fun with it still. It's really fun. I'm actually really enjoying it. I talked about it on last week's show, so I'm not going to bore you too much. There's no real major updates, and I'll talk about it more when I kind of finish the game. And then I was actually watching a lot of GDQ last week because I don't know if the audience knows what GDQ is. Basically, that stands for Games Done Quick. They basically do these like charity speed run streams like twice a year. Essentially, they do speed run streams throughout the year as well. But they helped raise money for the Prevent Cancer Foundation. And this time around, they had a whole bunch of speed runs. And since I was on vacation, Matt, I was watching speed runs left, right, and center while also doing other things. And one of the ones that actually closed out the show was a speed run of Metal Gear Solid, and it was the first time I'd actually seen a speed run at Metal Gear Solid before. But what that actually, kind of led to in my long-winded story here is that it made me think, hey, I haven't replayed Metal Gear Solid in like 10 years, and I remember really liking the game, so I should go back and play it again. So I have the discs. I threw them in my PlayStation 3 because that's a thing you can do, and I had a blast revisiting Metal Gear Solid. I think that game is still incredible. Yes, there's still some problems that with it that make it you're not really hold up today as far as some of the combat is concerned, like with the way the camera kind of works and kind of the aiming, especially in any of the sequences where you have to aim like the Stinger missile in first person view is kind of wonky. But for the most part, I just had a blast playing through it. Again, the writing, the characters, kind of the cinematography and all of the cinematics to just the story itself. Like I loved revisiting Metal Gear Solid, and I'm so glad I decided to do that over, not playing it for years and years and years. So I'm glad I checked it out again. Maybe I play the other Metal Gear games again. I don't know, but I have a whole bunch of other games on my plate that I want to get to as well, kind of before I have to go back to work next week. So who knows? Who knows?
So quick question, Ryan. Did you speed run it?
No, I took my time with it. I just played
had fun with it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I mean, my fastest playthrough of Metal Gear Solid 1 is like 2 hours. But
okay,
I this time around, I just took my time. It took me about 7 or 8 hours to finish it. So
nice,
very manageable.
Have you ever watched Summoning Salt? Very quickly, sorry. Have you ever checked out Summoning Salt's videos? If you haven't, they are some of my favorite speedrunning videos. And I don't usually care for I don't usually follow speedruns too much. But the way that he edits them is fascinating. So good.
I'll have to check that out. I haven't seen
please do.
Salt's videos.
You would love it.
Also, real quick, I just want to throw out there this morning, PlayStation sent out the PlayStation wrap up, where you could actually log in with your account and you could actually get your PlayStation stats. However, I would comment on this, but my stats haven't showed up yet. So, because basically if I go to the site, it just gives me an error message saying that your stats are not available yet. And I've seen a lot of our friends in the industry having the same problem, where some people are starting to share their stats. So I think that's something maybe we talk about on next week's show, unless Matt's got his handy. But I thought that was really interesting. So wrapup.playstation.com, check that out as well if you want to see how many hours you put into certain things. But anyways, let's slam the brakes on this conversation. It's time for some breaking news. And I know there's one big story that everyone wants us to talk about. We're going to get to that. We kind of want to get kind of some of the smaller stuff out of the way first, because I don't want the whole show to be taken up by that big topic. So first up, Lego Star Wars, The Skywalker Saga. We've been waiting for a release date forever. It finally has one. It's coming to PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 on April 5th. They released a new trailer today. That game still looks great. So I can't wait for this. I'm so excited to see this game from Traveler's Tales, especially kind of, revitalize the Lego games. Matt, where's your hype level on this one?
So you know what, Ryan? I did not care at all until this trailer. This trailer sold me so much on the game. I genuinely don't mess with Lego games too much. I've played a few of them in the past, and I really appreciate the humor. I appreciate how much effort and work they go into them. But for me, they always felt a little bit too arcadey. They felt like a little bit too loose in terms of the combat. Like I felt like I was literally just button mashing my way through stuff. So seeing them kind of overhaul the shooting mechanics, overhaul the combat, add in like the space exploration, and this game just seems like a Star Wars fan's dream. Just all smushed together. The fact that this isn't like 3 separate games or even 9 separate games just boggles my mind. So this went from me not caring whatsoever to being near the top of my most anticipated list now. I love Star Wars, and this game looks fantastic. The combat, you have actual combos and stuff. It looks ridiculous. The one thing, Ryan, that I didn't get to finish the whole trailer just because I was in the middle of a couple things. So I have a question. Before I ask you about your hype level, is there a local co-op? Is there a local multiplayer? Do we know?
Yeah, there should be.
Yes. Okay. 100%, 150% in now.
Yeah. I mean, that's the core of all the Lego games at this point. And I mean, unless something had to change that they haven't talked about yet, because when they originally announced it, they said there was going to be a local co-op, and I haven't heard anything contradicting that at this point. So there should be, but by all accounts. But again, if I'm wrong, again, that's on the developers for not communicating correctly. But yeah, as for me, yeah, I was already very excited about this from the second they announced it, and I can't wait for this one. And April 5th, I think, seems like a good date, because that's after all the stuff that we know about comes out. I mean, that'll be after we've killed Chaos, Matt, because we got to kill Chaos. That's a thing. Next up, Final Fantasy XIV. I know people have been waiting for this news for a while. It's going back on sale, Matt. You can finally buy the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV with a free trial that gives you all the way up to level 60 and the critically acclaimed expansion pack, Heaven's Ward. It's coming back on sale on January 25th, although the free trial, despite what I just said, not coming with it. So they haven't announced when the free trial is coming back, but at least you'll be able to purchase the game again, because the game has been so popular that they haven't even been able to sell it at this point because of the queue times. But now the queue times have gone down. I talked about this after answering a couple questions on the show 2 episodes back, that I was expecting to hear news about this pretty soon. And this comes with the news that essentially they're upgrading all of the data centers over in the other side of the world. Essentially, there's actually going to be an oceanic data center now as well, which is going to help people out who live in Australia and other regions as well, because they all had to basically sign into like the Japanese servers or the American servers, and half the time it didn't work correctly. So I think that I think this is going to be good for the game, and I know people are excited to jump into Final Fantasy XIV after all the Endwalker hype. So I'm glad that it's finally on sale, Matt. It's happening. We can finally get people likewise to come play in Eorzea with us.
Nostra Ryan strikes again, once again, calling the news before it even happens. Yeah, I'm excited that this is actually finally going to be available for people again. I actually think holding back the free trial for the time being is a genius call. Let people who want to purchase the game get in first, and then when things start to look a little bit better, which I'm assuming will probably be another month or so, before the free trial comes back. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm stoked. I'm really excited to jump back into this after my failure last week. My internet has still been spotty this week, which is wonderful. Yeah. But I'm excited to hop back in.
I was going to say, like, the 3 or 4 feet of snow does not help your internet, I would imagine. So definitely. But yeah, Final Fantasy XIV, please be excited. January 25th, jump in. And if anyone's playing, hit me up, because I would love to play with some people. But anyways, let's let some of our friends into the car with us. It's time for the carpool. We have one question that doesn't relate to the main topic, so I kind of wanted to talk about it here before we kind of get to the main topic of the show. This comes to us from Edward Varnell over at the Boss Rush Network at that retro code on Twitter. He asks, what qualities does Sony in-house developers produce that makes you appreciate their work? What areas can you see improvement that make you love a series more? So Matt, what about Sony first-party games makes you love them so much? Is there any qualities in particular they have that make you love them? What do you think?
I think for me, the biggest thing with a lot of the Sony first party stuff that I don't really see, especially with a lot of the other big kind of developers and publishers, especially with Xbox and Nintendo, to a lesser extent, but I love the narrative and the focus on story and single player stuff that a lot of the Sony first party devs seem to focus on. But Uncharted, The Last of Us, Spider-Man, like every one of those has not just incredible gameplay and is a lot of fun, the narrative around all of them that really, really makes me just more invested in the story and makes me more invested in that entire world. And I kind of think that, like, among especially, the big three, Sony's at the top of their game when it comes to narrative. And for me, that's what I really, really love about what we get from first party Sony. It's just that I know I'm in for a hell of a story. I know I'm in for a great time, which is why I really love, and even games that I genuinely, or even genres that I don't genuinely or generally gravitate towards. If it's Sony first party, I'll usually give it a whirl, because I at least know that there's like a certain level of quality that this is probably going to hit. But what about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I kind of feel the same way you did. Like, you kind of stole my answer in a lot of ways, where honestly, I feel like, especially because they are, really rich quality narrative experiences. Like, that's what I like about them. I love the stories in Sony first party games, whether it's, The Last of Us or God of War or Horizon. Like, that's the main reason I'm playing those games, is because of the narrative and the story behind them. And then the combat's also fun as well. So, I mean, they're just, whenever I boot up a game from Sony first party, I generally know that it's going to be a quality narrative experience that I think I'm going to really enjoy and I can really sink my teeth into. And that's what I enjoy about them. So yeah, I mean, that's what I think Sony does really, really well. As far as what areas of improvements that you can maybe say is that I think they just need more variety, because I mean, there's obviously the meme out there that all Sony first party games are basically, third person over the shoulder, shooting games or adventure games like The Last of Us, like Uncharted, like God of War. And I think they need more variety from first party as far as genres. So I would love to see even like a first person shooter from Sony first party. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit. But also like stuff like RPGs or even a fighting game or just like any other genre. I'd love to see kind of Sony kind of go outside the wheelhouse. They did a little bit with stuff like Astrobot with doing a platformer or Sackboy: A Big Adventure. But I'd love to see kind of more of that versus just doing the same type of formula with a lot of the games. But what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I agree. I think that and now that I really think about it, I think you're 100% on there. I would love to see some form of variety. I think, and especially like a JRPG-esque style game from Sony first party would be really cool. I think the biggest thing for me though is just because we still get a lot of stories about crunch coming from Sony first party stuff. We still have stuff like Insomniac, who were very clear about being like, hey, we didn't crunch much or at all on Spider-Man, and look at the quality that turned out. But we still have stories about stuff like Naughty Dog and the ridiculous crunch that some of these studios go through. So for me, I just want to kind of see more management and kind of because I think once I start hearing about it, there is a part of my brain that when I'm playing the game, I start thinking about like, oh my God, like how much did people suffer to make this? So I'd want to see them kind of handle the management side of things a little bit better, because that for me does play into how much I can enjoy a game, especially if I know about it kind of going into my first playthrough. So more variety. And I just, crunch as a whole is not a Sony first party exclusive problem. It's an industry wide issue, but I'd like to see, Sony kind of take the charge and alleviating that a little bit more, because we are starting to see it with stuff like Insomniac. I just want to see more of it. Well,
especially out of all the first party studios, when you compare it to Nintendo and Xbox, where we just don't hear those type of stories really from Microsoft or Nintendo. Obviously, I'm sure crunch happens at those places as well, but it's just we don't hear about it as much as we do from PlayStation. So it just leads me to believe that it probably is happening more. So yeah, I think you make a good point as well, Matt. Well, let's move on, because it's time for our cruise control topic of the week. And it's not a story that I was expecting to talk about this week, because it just came out of nowhere on Tuesday. But here we are. We have to talk about this from the lens of PlayStation. Xbox has bought Activision for $68 billion. We talked about this in great detail on the Xbox Drive yesterday. So if you want to hear our Xbox related thoughts on this deal, go listen to the Xbox Drive with myself and Sean, talk about it a great deal. Whereas I wanted to talk about this from what this means to PlayStation, because this is a big shift in the market. So what do we think how do we think this impacts PlayStation? So Matt, before we go into any of the things I kind of had planned, what do you think about this? Surface level thoughts on this? First of all, where were you when you heard this news? I need to know.
I was getting out of bed and I was reading it and I was like, what? And, Senna, my wife, was just kind of like, what are you doing so early in the morning? I'm like, hold on, let me explain this to you. She listened. She didn't care, but she listened. But I'm shocked. I did not expect, something of this kind of size and gravity to happen at all. I mean, Bethesda is one thing with Xbox picking up Bethesda last year, but to pick up something like Activision Blizzard, it was quite a shock, especially given the stories about everything that was happening at Activision Blizzard in the last few months. And Xbox was very definitively the first people to say, hey, this is not okay. We're reevaluating the relationship. So for me, I have to believe that they have a plan for what they're going to be doing to handle this. But I don't know, man. I'm so really, really surprised, and we're not going to see the ramifications for this for years. Yeah. So I'm shocked. What about you? Where are your surface level thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I was in a similar situation when I heard about it, where literally I woke up, there was 20 or 30 different notifications on my phone of people freaking out about this, and I was like, what? This doesn't even seem real to me. It seems like a prank. So I went to my computer and I looked further into it. I was like, oh, this is a real thing. So I actually hopped on a stream with Sean Capri at 9:30 in the morning, and we talked about it while I was half asleep. And I couldn't believe this either. It's definitely it's not something I was expecting for the same reasons you kind of brought up with, the lawsuit and everything else. But when I started to hear more about how this deal came together, I'm like, okay, that makes sense as to why this happened the way it did. Because Activision, for example, if you were to maybe try and buy them a year and a half ago, before all this stuff came out, I imagine the asking price for Activision would have been in the 100 billion range, essentially, as far as dollar amount, even though, their net worth as a company is only, 56 billion. That's how much they would have. They're a publicly traded company. And just the Call of Duty IP alone is probably worth, $10 to $20 billion by itself. So it was really interesting to see the number come about. And that's also why I thought it was kind of improbable as well that this type of thing would have happened. But again, just learning more about it, it seems it seems really interesting, and I'm actually curious to know kind of more about kind of some of the behind the scenes stuff and how this actually came about, how the negotiations came about and whatnot. But yeah, going back to what you said about kind of the lawsuit and kind of handling everything that's happening over there, it's I would imagine that Microsoft wouldn't be doing this if they didn't have a plan in place or if they didn't know how they were going to fix this. Like Phil Spencer's already come out on Twitter after this announcement happened and said, look, here are our values. And if you don't want to adhere to them, there's the door kind of thing. Like he said it in kind of like a more polite way of seeing things. But I would imagine like as soon as the ink dries on this, like anything, like anyone who goes against that culture is like, they're gone. Like no questions asked.
I really hope that's true. It upsets me that, Kotick, and I'm sure a lot of the board of members who defended him will probably get golden parachutes and, I'm sure they're going to exit out, but I'm sure they're going to do that comfortably. But I am glad that at the end of the day, hopefully, knock on wood, that they will be gone. Which means that anybody else coming into the company or people that are working there now will have an easier time, hopefully, in a more, safe and, comfortable workplace, regardless of what it is. Like if they're gone, hopefully that, their impact won't continue to be felt anymore on those companies. Because, not to say that they were the only issue, because there were extensive issues across the board, especially with Blizzard. But I hope this is the beginning of change. Yeah. Before we hop into some of these questions, I do really quickly want to shout out the absolutely brilliant ex-CEO Kaz Hirai Twitter account.
Oh my God, that was great.
The take that they put out, I want to shout this out real quick because it's brilliant. So they tweeted out on that morning that at Sony, we wanted to make a very strong and principled stance against employee harassment, which is why 30 minutes ago, we decided to never work with Activision Blizzard again. This person doesn't miss. They're just brilliant.
They came out of retirement to throw that tweet out there too, because that person famously retired, like I think it was like a couple of years ago, which was crazy.
Brilliant, so good.
Yeah, that's so good. So obviously this caused ripples across the industry. Again, we're not going to talk about the Microsoft implications of this, but I will say this morning, I'm glad that we actually waited till today to record this. Sony actually issued a statement about this, and they said that they fully expect Activision's games to remain multi-platform for the foreseeable future, because they expect obviously for Microsoft to continue to acknowledge all of the contracts that are in place, which obviously they're going to do. But I wonder what that's all going to mean as far as what contracts are in place. Like for example, with the Call of Duty like DLC first deal, like I wonder how long that deal lasts. Like if that's a 10-year deal and that stretches into 2030, that might, for example, prevent Call of Duty from becoming an exclusive to Xbox. But this also resulted in the stock price of Sony to dramatically drop as soon as this announcement happened. And it really just leaves kind of Sony in a kind of a precarious situation, especially because we don't really know what's going to happen once the ink dries on this deal. Like as far as, where Microsoft's going to take it, are Activision games or Blizzard games going to come to Sony platforms in the future? I mean, what's going to happen with a lot of this stuff? So first off, before we go any further, I want to bring in Locklith at Locklith TWT on Twitter, who asked the question: in light of the recent Xbox news, do you think Call of Duty will continue to stay on PlayStation as well? So I talked about this on the Xbox Drive with Sean yesterday, but I'm going to just reiterate what I said there as well, where I fully expect that with Call of Duty in particular, Warzone's going to stay multi-platform. There's going to be no change there as far as what happens with that. Or as well as if they introduce something like Warzone in the future or Warzone's successor, that'll be multi-platform too. But the mainline Call of Duty games, I think they, after 2024, starting with 2024's Call of Duty, that will be console exclusive to Microsoft, and it will be day one on Game Pass. And like the mainline Call of Duty games, I don't think are going to be coming to PlayStation. And again, unless there's like some contract in place that's going to prevent that from doing so. Matt, what do you think about this question?
I think you're spot on with stuff like Warzone. I mean, we already have precedents with things like with Minecraft staying multi-platform even after a Microsoft acquisition. So I think there's precedents there. But I do think you're right with the single player stuff. I don't think we're gonna see any shift, and probably till, like, for me, I think 2025 is the earliest we see them going exclusive. I do think them hitting Game Pass will be much more imminent. Like I think once the deal dries come, June 2023, I think whatever November's, Call of Duty will be following, I think will be on Game Pass and kind of in perpetuity going forward. But I don't think we're going to see them just kind of cut and dry it right away. I think you're right. There's probably a number of contracts in place. There's probably plenty of stuff going on that we don't know about that'll alter some of these deals. But for me, I do think that we are on the road to Call of Duty, the kind of the mainline Call of Duty games being exclusive to Xbox and PC probably, because that's how Microsoft likes to roll. So I don't know. I think, like you said, I think Warzone is going to stay multi-platform or whatever, that kind of free-to-play-ish model. It will probably stay that way. But I think in terms of the single-player stuff, I don't know. I'm of two minds on this one as well, because, like, I mean, Call of Duty sells ridiculously. Every year it sells ridiculously. But I don't know if it's a system seller. I don't know if people would hop over to Xbox only for Call of Duty if that's where it lived. I think people who are already on Xbox or who are considering it, sure. But I don't know if a number of people would go from PlayStation to Xbox only because of Call of Duty. And I'm kind of thinking more about like the general populace.
So I actually think people would if it was exclusive, which is why which is where I think kind of the beauty in this kind of lies, because we saw something similar happen where essentially during the 360 era, you know, the home for Call of Duty wasn't on PlayStation. It was on Xbox because they had the marketing deal with Activision. They had all the maps and DLC come first to Xbox during the 360 era. And it wasn't until the PlayStation 4 era where we saw that shift happen, where I know a lot of people in real life who are casual gamers who basically buy, you know, 3 games a year. They buy Madden, they buy Call of Duty, and they buy something else, that bought a PlayStation specifically for Call of Duty. So because obviously they can get Madden on everything. So because they wanted to play with their friends, and this was of course before, you know, the days of crossplay. So I think that this will actually affect the landscape quite a bit. I think if it becomes, which is why like the beauty of it, where I think like if the mainline Call of Duty series is exclusive to Xbox, people will buy Xboxes just for Call of Duty. Like that will be a thing. But again, that's not Microsoft's game. You have to remember that. Like it's not about, you know, individual unit sales. That's not what they're after. They're looking to make Game Pass the sweetest deal possible for everyone out there. Like that's their game. That the game is not for them to sell units, which is why I'm so adamant about it being a big shift for Call of Duty, just moving over to them, because again, that's what they want. They want it on Game Pass, and they want that to be the front line center way for people to buy the game or consume the game in that way. I think that's just what Microsoft is really going for. I mean, otherwise, not only that, but you know, to quote Paris Lily, you know, you don't buy a company for $68 billion and not change, like you don't buy Call of Duty for that amount of money and not change anything about it or release it on your computer. Sure. So that's why I think like if you want your Call of Duty fix on PlayStation, it's going to be with Warzone or again, whatever successor comes with Warzone down the road, if they ever, you know, release like a battle royale sequel to it for whatever reason.
I'm so curious to see. Like I said, it's going to be years before we actually see the fallout of this, but like, I don't know, man, this is massive. I'm shocked still.
Yep. So before we again move on with some of these other questions, I have to ask you, how big of a blow do you think this is to Sony? Like, how do you think like it's like game changing to the point where Sony has to scramble and kind of change their plans for the next couple of years, or do you think it's not really going to affect them at all? What do you think, Matt?
I think this is game changing. But I don't think it's going to be like we've already said. I don't think it's going to be an abrupt thing. I think we're going to see a very slow crawl over the next few years, especially after the deal's actually done, to see just how significant this is going to be. If Xbox kind of continues down the road, like, can you imagine a world where, you know, Final Fantasy XIV is, you know, home on PlayStation, but World of Warcraft could find its home on Xbox? Like there's a lot here that could significantly change things. And in terms of like, you know, Game Pass, I really do genuinely believe that the only reason PlayStation is doing anything with the rumors with Spartacus is only because of Game Pass. I don't think they ever would have made a move like this, at least not in this kind of speed or whatever we're going to, once we find out what it actually is. But I think that it is a direct response to Game Pass, because again, the narrative cannot just stay Xbox is crushing it with Game Pass and PlayStation now is just eternally forgotten about. So I feel like this really does put PlayStation on its back foot. I don't think it'll change anything in terms of the quality of its games or the, you know, the quality of its first party offerings. But when it comes to the third party and when it comes to their services, I think that's where we're going to start seeing really massive shifts in the next few years, because they're going to have a reason for you to say, hey, play on PlayStation outside of just exclusives anymore. Because again, we're already seeing more of their exclusives come to PC. We're already seeing more of a shift in that space. We're already seeing something happening with whatever Spartacus is going to be. I think Xbox now has been slowly positioning themselves over the last few years to kind of deal with damage like this. And I think PlayStation is going to have to start considering how they're going to handle it because what they're doing right now won't be enough when things kind of, when things settle. Am I off base here, Ryan? What do you think?
No, I agree. In fact, if you look at, because funnily enough, the same day that this announcement happened, the NPD report came in for the top selling games of 2021 on every platform. And the top 2 selling games on PlayStation last year were Call of Duty Vanguard and Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Like back-to-back games where like those were the 2 biggest games. So you're losing obviously 2 of the best selling games on PlayStation if they go exclusive, but also just even outside that, I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where I think what this means for first party Sony is I think they do need to double down more on exclusives, whether that's timed exclusives from third parties or maybe, ramping up their own game as far as, bringing in a variety of different genres. Again, if Call of Duty, for example, goes exclusive to Microsoft, even if they don't announce that, like, let's say like until like 5 or 10 years down the road, like Sony's going to need a flagship first person shooter on their console because they've already lost Doom and Wolfenstein and like all the Bethesda shooters. They'll possibly be losing Call of Duty. So what other shooter franchises are on PlayStation at that point, right? So, or especially single player shooters
would be the only one, right?
Yeah, like that would be it. Or again, if Respawn ever does a Titanfall 3, like there's that too. But beyond that, beyond what EA does, that's it. So, and we already know like first person shooters are one of the best selling genres out there, especially to casual audiences. So I think that really means Sony really needs a first person shooter of some kind, whether it's Resistance or Killzone coming back or a new IP or some kind of exclusive first person shooter. I think they definitely need that in their wheelhouse, or even like a first party RPG to kind of compete with something like Diablo or World of Warcraft. I mean, they already have Final Fantasy XIV to kind of compete with that, but I think they need to explore more of that space as well. But you raised your hand, Matt, so I'll go to you for a second.
It's time for Mag 2, baby. It's time to bring back massive action game. Mag 2.
But yeah, I think you're spot on. I think shooters sell. It's a really accessible, genre for a lot of people to kind of jump in there. And outside of, I don't know, bringing back SOCOM, bringing back Killzone, but again, like how many teams are you going to have on shooters that can pump out that kind of quality? And I mean, Call of Duty's, even just its kind of market share and its kind of, frame of gamer mind, a lot of people buy it every year, regardless of quality, regardless of anything else. I mean, Vanguard, like we talked about it, right? Like it felt like nobody was talking about Vanguard, but it was number 1 on NPD. So like, regardless of, what the kind of Twitter, ecosphere is talking about, it continues to sell. And I don't know. And I mean, like the last Battlefield was a dud. Let's be honest here. It was not great. Unless they get that down as an exclusive, but even still, I don't know how quickly they're going to be able to put together a shooter that can even rival Call of Duty in terms of sales, let alone even come close.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man.
Yeah. So sticking with this topic, let's bring in TPR from Discord, who asks, I think Sony responds to Activision Blizzard getting heavily reinvested in themselves. Sony doesn't have the dollars to do anything about the acquisition by Xbox, but they can respond internally with masterfully and handcrafted experiences. Let's say Sony responds at least in part by bringing back a dormant franchise of theirs back to the limelight. Which series would you like to see brought back? I would absolutely kill for Resistance 4 or a Killzone, kind of, talking about what I talked about with a heavily multiplayer focus rebooted. What are your thoughts? I'm curious to hear them. So beyond that, beyond the first person shooter stuff we talked about, is there another Sony franchise that's dormant, Matt, that you think would help out in this type of situation to help kind of bring some of the more casual players over that might play Activision Blizzard games? Because you have to remember, Activision Blizzard also has like a wide variety of game types as well. They've got rhythm games with stuff like Guitar Hero, even though Guitar Hero is kind of dead. They've got, games like Tony Hawk. They've got, Spyro and Crash. They've got 3D character platformers like those games. Like what other franchise do you think from Sony we can bring back besides the shooter ones that we just talked about?
I genuinely don't know, man. I really don't know what they can really do to kind of thing. Like I think Astrobot positions itself very easily to become the new kind of Spyro or Crash in terms of like a 3D action platformer. We've already seen it start to happen with, you know, the demo that we got on PS5. And I really do think that they're working on like a full experience in that. So in terms of rivaling that kind of stuff, I think that's imminent. I think that's coming soon. But in terms of other dormant franchises, I think like Killzone, SOCOM, and Resistance, like a lot of people have been calling for Resistance for a long time. I think I've never played any of the Resistance games, so I can't speak to them in terms of their quality. But like I know how much people really adore them. And for me, it always feels like Resistance was kind of more critically acclaimed and more loved than Killzone. I feel like, I don't know, like Killzone to me has always been, okay, it's there. So I think SOCOM has an interesting possibility in terms of like a more like military based shooter. But in terms of other types of games, I don't know, man. Like Harmonix has already been gobbled up, right? Like, I mean, that Harmonix is now, you know, part of Epic. I really don't know what else they can bring back. I mean, Parappa, maybe. Like, I just don't. I feel like a lot of what's left in kind of Sony's back catalog is kind of like, you know, cult favorites. It's a lot of games that people really love, like even stuff like Siphon Filter. Like there's a lot of games that people really love, but I don't know if any of them will kind of rival the mindshare that a lot of these games, like, I mean, look at things like Overwatch, right? Like, I mean, was Overwatch 2 now going to be exclusive? Like, I just don't know what they could bring back that would really set them apart. But I don't know, Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm in a similar camp where ultimately, besides the shooter franchises that we talked about, I think there's a lot of more niche stuff they could bring back. Stuff like Legend of Dragoon, for example, which is, again, like a huge favorite of the fans. But I don't think it would sell super well if they did like another Legend of Dragoon. Not only that, but it wouldn't rival something like, you know, Diablo 4, if that's exclusive, which at this point, like, I think all bets are off with Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4. I think those games are actually probably going to be exclusive to Xbox at this point. They never announced platforms for them. So unless there was already a deal in place for them to come to PlayStation, like there's no way that those games come to PlayStation at this point. So I'm really interested to see what they kind of do with some of their franchises. And I don't think that they really have anything first party that they can really do. But I do think, again, I think they just need to start exploring that space more. And again, it might just be, you know, making a new action RPG series, like a new action RPG IP, for example, to kind of rival something like Diablo from first party, or, you know, doing a new like extreme sports series, like to kind of rival something like Tony Hawk. I think that's kind of the approach maybe that you kind of go with it, rather than kind of drudging up, you know, like Cool Borders or something like that, or Jet Moto or some of these older franchises. So there you go.
Wave Racer exclusive. Let's get Wave Racer over on PlayStation.
No, that Sony or Nintendo owns that IP, Matt. We can't bring that over.
Buy that.
Next up, Andrew Semachek over at WTN. Andrew asked the question, which company could Sony purchase to quote unquote punch back at Xbox? And the answer is, Andrew, I mean, they're not going to go buy a company. Let's not kid ourselves, because that's not Sony's game. Sony's game is to sign exclusivity deals for franchises people care about to make them exclusive to PlayStation. That's been their playbook since the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5 era happened, and I expect that to fully continue. And maybe that's where they double down on it, rather than because Sony obviously doesn't have the money to go out and buy big studios. And to be fair, I think that's the wrong strategy for them, because they will lose to Microsoft every time with that, because Microsoft has so much more money to throw at that stuff. Or even you have to remember, Microsoft isn't the only company out there that's doing this. You've got Tencent to worry about. You got Google and Amazon kind of entering the space, and they've got, you know, trillions of dollars to throw around when it comes to this stuff, especially Tencent in particular, because they're gobbling up studios left, right, and center, and they've got more money than Xbox at this point as far as their gaming division is concerned. So I think that's the position of having them punch back at Xbox by buying a studio is the wrong way to go about it. I think not only that, but the way, you know, Sony purchases their studios, they always have some kind of relationship with them first before purchasing them. And basically they're just locking them up that way. But if they can lock up a franchise, let's say like Final Fantasy, without having to buy Square Enix, I think that's the smarter approach for Sony to go with. And I think that's exactly the type of thing you'll see, where maybe they go to Square Enix and say, what's the asking price for like your 5 biggest franchises, Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, Tomb Raider, to have those exclusive to PlayStation? What's the dollar amount? We will write you a check, kind of thing. That's the type of thing I expect. So that to throw out some ideas. Again, Final Fantasy #1. I think that's something they're going to make a major player for. But even you could see something outside of that space, like maybe they go to a company like Ubisoft and be like, hey, Assassin's Creed, what's the dollar amount we can pay you to make this, exclusive to PlayStation or timed exclusive? Stuff like that. Like, I think that's more their game. But Matt, what do you think about this question?
I think you're right, but I also think we considering just the news aspect of it and how much of how many waves. I mean, like we said, we saw Sony's stock price drop after this acquisition, right? Like, I do think that in terms of the games coming to the platform, I think you're right. I think they're probably going to go in that direction. But in terms of just kind of, getting out there and starting to talk about things, you're entirely so I'm just going to pull from Den of Geek here for a second. I pulled up an article. So like Microsoft's market cap is 2.3 trillion. Obviously, a lot more than Sony's 143 billion. So like, yeah, Microsoft has the money to throw around like this. Sony definitely does not. So when it comes to like potential acquisitions, I think you're right, Ryan. I don't think they're going to buy anything I mean, I don't see them buying Ubisoft. Yeah. I don't see them buying for me, maybe Bandai Namco, maybe Square Enix, maybe Capcom. Like I think
but even those would be a stretch because like Bandai Namco or Sega or Square Enix, like they're publicly traded at amounts as far as what they're valued at is close to the 10 billion mark combined with the fact that they're all publicly traded companies. They'd have to buy them above that. And when you talk about how much Sony has to work with that, with the 110 billion, let's say, or the number you just read off, they can't just devote that to just buying companies. So that's why I think like those are like even a company like Square Enix, I think is kind of a little out of Sony's reach if they wanted to try and purchase them.
Yeah. So from what I'm seeing here, like Square Enix is at like 5.9 billion. So I think you're right. They probably would go north of 10 billion in terms of if they are actually buying it. I don't know, man. I'm so curious to see if Sony would pony up just because like you said, like, especially I think Square Enix would make the most sense for them if they were considering any sort of overall acquisition, just because again, with stuff like Final Fantasy and a lot of the franchises that Square Enix has, you're having a lot of history there. You have a lot of games that you can bring back. There's that well is deep if they wanted to go for it. Will they is a whole different question.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. It makes a lot more sense to kind of go and try and pick up franchises. And again, if they do get something like an Assassin's Creed, if they do get something like Final Fantasy to remain, exclusive for in perpetuity, then I think that's really interesting. I'm just really curious to see if that would be enough of like a stock swing for them to be like, hey, we have Final Fantasy now. Would we see? Obviously, it wouldn't be the kind of jump that in terms of the loss that they had, this week. But like, I'm very curious to see how they're going to do it because reports were already going around that they're getting really aggressive with the third-party exclusivity deals. But for me, there's always that when it comes to that kind of thing, there's always like a clock ticking in the background about like when are those deals going to be up? When does Microsoft enter the conversation? Because let's say they do lock down Final Fantasy for the next 5 years. I can't imagine Square Enix would like sell them the IP outright, right? So let's say they do lock down an exclusivity deal for the next 5 years. I really do think that as we're getting closer to the end of those 5 years, Microsoft would be knocking on the door being like, hey, Square, let's have a conversation. Because there's nothing that Sony can do outside of, playing nice with Microsoft now in terms of any of the other stuff. And, basically being like, hey, how about you don't take this away from us? Even if they lock down a franchise for the next little while, I feel like that will always have like a clock ticking on it to see when is that deal going to be up and when is another player going to enter the picture, regardless if it's Microsoft or Tencent or anything else.
Yeah. A
straight up acquisition, they hold on to that now, right? But I don't know. That's what I mean. Like I can really see both sides of it. They just don't have the amount of FU money that Microsoft has to throw around when it comes to buying, larger studios and larger publishers like this. So I don't know, dude. I really don't know.
That's why I think they gotta go for small victories rather than kind of like one large victory. I think that death by 1,000 cuts versus hitting them over the head with a hammer essentially, I think is how they approach this one. I don't know why I use those metaphors, but let's just go with it. But yeah. So overall, I think we should maybe wrap up this conversation. So Matt, final thoughts on this. Overall, where do you think maybe Sony lands in the next 5 years? Do you think Sony, for example, 5 years from now is still the market leader when it comes to games or the perceived market leader when it comes to games? Or do you think maybe Microsoft steps in? Where do you think the future goes? Look into your crystal ball a little bit. What do you think?
I think honestly, the biggest thing that's going to happen 5 years from now it's going to be a battle of services at this point. It's going to be which service can you get the most bang for your buck on in terms of, buying in. I I think the hardware sales are going to be, kind of secondary, like you've already mentioned, right? Like that's not Microsoft's game anymore. And I think Sony's going to have to reevaluate. I think the way that they do their consoles and the way that they sell, and especially with PS5 remaining as it is, basically the top selling thing ever right now. I think it's going to be an interesting point where, because I think Sony's consoles will continue to sell, and I think they're going to continue to sell well ahead of the competition. But when it comes to services, the amount of, subscribers that might be on Game Pass or, across PC and Xboxes themselves, like I really do think that 5 years from now, it's going to be a battle of services compared to the, the classic, battle of hardware. And it's going to take PlayStation to start really interesting. Like I wonder if 5 years from now, are we going to have, PlayStation first party games day one on whatever Spartacus or the next iteration of that might look like 5 years from now? Are we going to have that service also available on your phone and on PC more readily available without the need to have a PlayStation? I'm really curious to see how this is going to shake out for them, because I think in terms of their games, I think we're going to get some really interesting games from them in the next 5 years because of these deals like this that, like you said, hopefully they diversify and we get some, breathtaking new resistance or some Killzone. I hope we get to see some stuff come back in a really significant way. But I think 5 years from now, it's going to be a battle of where are people playing, what service are people playing their games on versus what console they're playing on. And I think that's when it's going to start getting interesting. But what about you, Ryan? Where do you see yours? Where do you see the crystal ball?
Yeah, like honestly, I think it's one of those situations I always talk about with when people are like, oh, when should I jump into X, Y, and Z type of console? Like what's a day one purchase for me as far as games are concerned. And I always describe that as kind of like a tipping scale, where essentially when more and more things kind of add to the scale and it kind of tips a bit, it makes you want to purchase, like get invested in that ecosystem eventually. Because, let's say on Xbox, if there is eventually, 20 or 30 things that you want to play on there, you're much more inclined to buy an Xbox versus, just sticking with one console. And I think that's the way the service game is going to work, where essentially there's enough, if Microsoft builds Game Pass with enough content that you care about, it'll eventually be a deal that's too good of a deal to kind of ignore eventually.
Yeah.
And we're already kind of seeing that point with Game Pass, but adding the Activision Bethesda content by itself, especially with anything else Microsoft acquires between now and, in the next 5 years, I think it's really going to be exactly what you described, where I think it's going to be the service wars. And I think that's essentially how Microsoft sees it. That's why they're making these acquisitions, is to basically bolster their service in preparation for that. Because again, like I imagine in 5 or 10 years, it's possible that we have, a Google Stadia or an Amazon Luna become a bigger player in the scene, or even another streaming company or another service company that gets in there, that maybe even Steam does this, where Steam maybe offers something akin to Game Pass, but for PC, or that they work with like mobile or the Steam Deck or something like that. Like I think you're going to see more of this rather than less of this, kind of like what we saw with, video streaming services when Netflix became super popular. I'm imagining the same things are going to happen here, especially with when news like this makes waves. Like that's when you start to see more people kind of enter the space and see dollar signs. So I think that's exactly where we're going with this. I mean, not to mention what's going to happen with blockchain games and stuff like that too, because I mean, that's a whole can of worms that we're not going to get into here as well. Nope. So I definitely think in 5 years from now, the market will have definitely changed. And if Spartacus is a dud, as far as the service is concerned, if it's another PlayStation now, it's not going to be good enough. And I think they will be not the market leader at this point. If it's but if it offers enough value, then yeah, I think they will be able to remain on top because of the pedigree of their first party titles alone. But Matt, were you going to say?
One last question, Ryan, before we go, because I feel like we'd be remiss not to bring this up at least once. Do you see Game Pass coming to PlayStation at all in the next 5 years? Do you think that's a possible future? Maybe not likely, but do you think there's a world where we get Game Pass on PlayStation in the next little while?
So if the intention was, or if Sony had imagined a scenario where Game Pass was going to come to Xbox, if they were going to end up, getting that check from Microsoft, they wouldn't be doing this Project Spartacus thing, I think. Like, I don't think they would invest all this money to kind of put together their own Game Pass rival service if they ever imagined a day where they would, sign a bill to have Microsoft Game Pass, Xbox Game Pass be on PlayStation. I don't think that's the direction they're going to go in, unless, of course, there's a leadership at Sony, because I don't think Jim Ryan, as long as he's kind of the leader at Sony, I don't think he ever will allow Game Pass on PlayStation. I think that's just how stubborn they are about this type of thing. And again, they wouldn't invest all this money in Spartacus, as far as we know that it exists, without like if they were intending on letting Game Pass on there. So I personally don't think so. But Matt, what do you think?
I think there's a possibility, like you mentioned, if Spartacus is a dud, if they possibly didn't do this right, and what we get out of it isn't a service that people are willing to jump on. I could see, again, if the kind of Steam continues and some stuff like Call of Duty does become exclusive, I could see a world where 5 years from now, Game Pass is on PlayStation. But that would mean that like PlayStation, I think the only world that happens if PlayStation really gets, knocked around the next few years, if Spartacus is a dud, if all of these things kind of line up in a way that PlayStation is losing its footing, I think there's a possibility for it. Is it likely? I don't know, but I think there is a possibility that it could happen if they start to lose.
Yeah,
because that's what we traditionally see PlayStation always start to act when it starts to slide back, and that's when you start to see change.
I think with this news, it's much more likely that a service like Game Pass comes to Nintendo Switch versus PlayStation at this point, because I don't see Nintendo investing in Nintendo Switch Online in the same way that Sony is with Spartacus. So I would imagine, maybe the talks are 2 years from now that when the Switch successor comes out and it can actually run games like Call of Duty or Diablo 4 or something like that on it. Then I think that's the more likely candidate for Game Pass at this point is Nintendo first. And then again, all of those ducks would have to go in a row, like you talked about, Matt, where the company PlayStation would have to really be hurting, I think, to kind of invite Game Pass to their console, I think. So there you go. Anyways, Matt, we got to go. But before we go, Matt, plugs go.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at burnout_Matt, and you can find us over at youtube.com/burnoutbrighter. Our mental health series is live, so come check out the first episode of Mental Health Power Up, where the first episode is just the three of us talking about kind of where we're at and kind of setting the series up and our intentions with it. And next week we get rolling with a bunch of amazing doctors and other people who will be coming on to talk to us, so come hang out.
Nice. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can find us on Twitter at Yumi Capri's, on YouTube at youtube.com/Yumi Capri, and on podcast services around the globe. So for Matt Sawinski, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been episode 35 of the PlayStation Drive, and we're out. The PlayStation Drive is fueled by patrons over at patreon.com/Yumi Capri, and I want to say thank you to each and every one of our patrons from the bottom of my heart from your support across all of our content. And let's start by thanking our premium producers, Dallas Ford, Lee Navarro, the fearless leader of the Phoenix Overdrive Extra Life team, and Jonathan Brown over at youtube.com/PM Entertainment. Our platinum producers, Robbie Bobby Miller and Trucker Sloth, and our gold members, Argo, Brendan Myers, Dallas Robbins, Emily O'Kelly, Heather Boney, James Johnson, Joel Brooks, Jose Jimenez, Mac Time, Benji Kong, Marcus O'Neill, RJ Kern, Dano, Skinny Matt, Mr. and Mrs. Nasty Boots, Fulia Fuji, and Xavier Reyes. Thank you all for all of your support.